Dumelang, welcome to Face the Nation. My name is Clement Banyatela. Great to have you with us here on SABC News. On the show tonight, as the clock ticks for political parties to finalize their agreements regarding the formation of a government of national unity, the EFF is standing firm on their position that they don't want to be involved in any government of unity that involves the DA. The EFF's Deputy President, Floyd Shivambu, speaks to us tonight. Also on the show, is there a deal on the cards in KwaZulu-Natal? The NFP seems to have chosen to work with the ANC and the IFP and possibly the DA in an agreement that may see the IFP President, Velenkosini Hlabisa, elected as Premier of that province. The NFP President, Evan Barnes, is going to speak to us tonight. The DA's Solly Malatsi will also join us about the status of the DA's discussions. The party released a statement not so long ago saying the Federal Council has unanimously endorsed a resolution affirming the mandate of a federal leader, John Steenhuisen, and the party's negotiating team to continue with the process towards the formation of governments at national and provincial levels where there are hung legislatures. So what does this mean? Is this a go-ahead to finalize an agreement with the ANC? Is the DA now agreeing to be part of the executive, which will be formulated by the African National Congress? We'll find out from the DA spokesperson. And then later, we'll bring in Parliament to tell us if it's all systems go for Friday's first sitting. But first, my comment. So the clock is ticking. It's literally the race against time for political parties to conclude their discussions about forming a new government. Friday is D-Day. Members of Parliament will be sworn in and the president is expected to be elected. But even with 2 days to go before that important sitting in Parliament, parties are still engaged in tough negotiations. What is clear, though, is that the ANC so far they've decided on a government of national unity. It's an open invitation for all parties, really, depending, of course, on what the parties are willing to agree on in terms of this agreement. President Cyril Ramaphosa, at the end of the NEC meeting last week, said they had constructive discussions with a few parties, including the EFF, the IFP, the DA, the NFP, and the PA. He said the ANC entered discussions with an open mind to speak to parties who seek to advance the interests of the people of this country. So what are you expecting from the political parties in this crucial moment in our country, 2 days before the first sitting of the 7th Parliament, which is supposed to elect a president? The election of the president requires parties to have at least agreed on some fundamentals in order to ensure that the process is seamless, because there's no party with an overwhelming majority. The EFF responded like this after the ANC president's statement last week.
We do not want to form any part of a government with representatives of the white colonial and apartheid system. And we think now that through fair observation and what got to happen with the Democratic Alliance and all these minority white parties, they represent that agenda.
The IFP has also been categorically clear that it would not work with the ANC when we had them on the show before elections.
We want to have a clear majority in KwaZulu-Natal. And should we not get a clear majority, we have partners in the multi-party charter with whom we are governing 13 municipalities in KwaZulu-Natal. That is the political grouping we will consider in forming a coalition, not the ANC. The ANC destroyed our province. You can't go into a coalition with someone who destroyed the province you want to rebuild and create a stable economic background with the one who destroyed it.
And who can forget the DA? They branded the EFF as enemy number one. It's been reported that they are also against being part of a government of national unity that involves the economic freedom fighters, as much as the EFF doesn't want to work with the DA as well in the government of national unity. Here's what one of the leaders of the DA has said in the past.
Today, I publicly declare Julius Malema's EFF to be political enemy number one of the Democratic Alliance. And I commit the DA to fight back against the EFF at every turn, with the ultimate aim of defeating the Doomsday Coalition that could seal South Africa's fate next year. This is no longer about politics, Democrats. It's about the survival of democracy and the survival of South Africa.
And of course, different political party leaders have said things before elections that would have to change sometimes after elections. But this moment now, and here, requires political parties to work together. It requires them to find some common ground for the good of this country and overcome their differences. But how do they do that without compromising on their principles? How do they do that without compromising on their policies, without compromising their supporters? The president said a government of national unity cuts across the divide of politics and ideology. He said parties must not only collaborate, but come together and forge a common future for the country. But what if that coming together compromises the very nature and ideals of the political party? So forcing parties to come together when they don't see eye to eye on the most fundamental things, how's that going to work over the next 5 years? Unless, of course, we just want a caretaker administration, for lack of a better phrase, that runs things over the next 5 years with no fundamental changes in policy, no new laws that are fundamental, that are passed, because there are ideological differences even among parties that would be in the government of national unity. So what then becomes the point? How is history going to record the next 5 years of this country? So the question I'm asking you tonight is, what are you expecting the political party you have voted for to do in this crucial moment, 2 days before the first sitting of Parliament where the president has to be elected? Whether it's the ANC, the DA, the EFF, the MK party, the IFP, whichever party you voted for, what do you expect them to do? Do you expect them to compromise in their negotiations for the bigger picture? Or do you expect them to stand firm, to stand their ground and stand by their ideological position? You can send us your WhatsApp voice note right now on 078 459 1897. Remember to tell us your name and surname and where you're sending that voice note from. Please keep them at 30 seconds. Alternatively, you can send us an X on @FaceTheNation SABC. Now, the economic freedom fighters announced on Friday that it would not participate in a government that includes the Democratic Alliance. On Thursday, last week, President Cyril Ramaphosa stated that the ANC leadership had decided that a broad collaboration was the most suitable way forward for South Africa. During the election campaign, the DA had referred to any potential alliance between the ANC and the EFF or even the MK as a doomsday coalition that would negatively impact the economy. The EFF's Deputy President, Floyd Shivambu, joins us now in studio. Floyd, thank you so much for joining us on Face the Nation. Good evening.
Thank you very much for having us.
Let's start with just the understanding. The President indicated that the ANC met with a number of parties, including the EFF. There were constructive discussions. Are you able to share with us how constructive those were? What did they propose? What did you put on the table before the ANC?
No, look, we have, as the Economic Freedom Fighters met with the leadership, the delegation from the ANC, which came, first meeting was to say they've got 3 different options as to what should happen now that there's no outright winner after the 2024 general elections. And then the next meeting, they came to say that they came from the National Executive Committee to say that they are proposing a government of national unity which includes all political parties that contested elections. And then we say that doesn't make sense. It's not sensible to say that all political parties that contested elections must form government together. We then say that there has to be sound ideological principles and foundational values that define whoever is going to constitute government together, so that you do not spend a lot of time debating and clashing amongst each other as government as to what foreign policy positions do you take, how do you interpret the poverty, inequality, and unemployment crisis that is defining South Africa. How do you approach the redress question? And our persuasion to the ANC was to say that because despite the fact that we have got substantial ideological differences with the ANC, there are at least some common features that define us and maybe other political parties. One is the emphasis that we should redress the historical imbalances that were caused by colonialism and apartheid. We should redress the imbalances of the past. We should confront white supremacy and domination over the economy. But you have got political parties that do not believe in such ideals, which think that let's just proceed as if there was no colonialism and apartheid in South Africa, who are not even associated at all with the redress question, but also who are saying that let us uplift the very progressive gains that were gained in protection of workers' rights. We then say that there are so many basic principles which we can agree on. Of course, in terms of what happens afterward, we might disagree because our path says that ultimately we should go into economic freedom in our lifetime, which is socialist in character. But in the immediate, there are issues which we can agree upon with the African National Congress as to what do we confront as government. We can have common foreign policy because more or less we agree as to association with the global south and progressive forces all over the world. But the ANC then took an approach that they want to constitute a government of everyone else who has contested election, and we thought that is not a wise decision because we should have a clear agenda of what we seek to achieve. Who
else did you have reservations about? Was it only the Democratic Alliance that you felt you are too ideologically opposed to, or would you be okay if the ANC said, let's involve any other party but the Democratic Alliance?
Look, the reality of the matter in South Africa is that the Democratic Alliance and even the South African electorate have been utilizing the Democratic Alliance as an instrument to protect white interests, like those that were gained in white privilege that was gained because of colonialism and apartheid in South Africa. That is why you've got a situation that almost 100% of white electorate in South Africa vote for white political parties. If they don't vote for the DA, they vote for the Freedom Front Plus. So you would see that in these 2024 elections, the DA did not necessarily grow. They never actually gained additional votes from the black majority and African electorate. They gained the votes which they had lost between 2014 and 2019, which they had lost to the Freedom Front Plus, even the number of seats. So Freedom Front Plus loses 4 seats. The DA gains 4 seats in that intervening period, to show that the white minority have taken a decision that they are going to vote all of them for just 2 white political parties. Maybe some minor components vote for the ACDP, but they just vote that because they want to protect the privilege that they had gained, the advantage that they had gained because of colonialism and apartheid in South Africa. Because if we were to gauge South Africa's socio-economic indications, the unemployment levels amongst white people in South Africa, it's far lesser than the black majority and Africans in particular. Like actually, if we were to gauge the developmental indicators of white people in South Africa, they would be possibly in the top 10 most developed nations in the world in terms of literacy rates, access to education, life expectancy, in terms of the employment levels, in terms of basic all the indications that show that people are living in a better environment. And that is what they want to protect to the exclusion of everyone else. And that is what they want to protect for the exploitation of everyone else. That is why, if you check the patterns of political party funding and support in South Africa, the white capitalist establishment, they pumped hundreds of millions to parties which must maintain the status quo. And it looks like the African National Congress is joining that band as well, of those that want to maintain the status quo where black people and Africans are just suppliers of cheap and easily disposable labor, whilst the white capitalists continue to exploit and oppress majority of our people and keep them in the spaces that they were segregated upon under apartheid.
So if you have more commonalities with the African National Congress, why did you then support the DA in Ekurhuleni, in Johannesburg, in the metros? Because if you are not too ideologically distant from the African National Congress, why did you offer your support in votes to have mayors in Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni?
Let me give you the latest information now, and then I will come back to that question. We are currently in the same government with the African National Congress in Nelson Mandela Bay, where we are responsible for infrastructure and electricity and water and sanitation. We are currently in government with the African National Congress, where there's an ANC mayor in Ekurhuleni. We are responsible for finance, for healthcare, for waste, for a variety of other responsibilities. Here in the city of Johannesburg, the ANC is in government together with the EFF. The EFF is responsible for public safety and healthcare. We took a correct decision after we had said to the ANC after the 2016 local government elections and after the 2021 local government elections that before we vote for ANC mayors, there are foundational principles that we must agree to in terms of the redress agenda, in terms of prioritizing our people, in terms of the transformative agenda, but also it even elevated some of the national issues. And the ANC arrogantly did not want to talk about the issues that affect our people on the ground. They just want an elite pack that let's just share positions without discussing what then obtains on the ground.
Have they discussed that in this new agreement?
That, by the way, currently, our approach to negotiation now is to then deal with principal issues as to what is in it for the people of South Africa. Before we do the elite pack thing of who must be a speaker, who must be a minister of what and what, we're first discussing the principle of how do we constitute government. And in the past, the ANC did never agreed. Even, by the way, those instances where I gave you of Nelson Mandela Bay, of Nelson, of Ekurhuleni, of Johannesburg, and even in Ethekwini in some instances, was never with the approval of the national leadership of the ANC. It was done with the provincial leadership who had said that, but this is logical, we can agree on a common agenda. There seem to be some puppet master who is in control of the national leadership of the ANC, who's telling them what to do. So that characterization of the Democratic Alliance of the EFF as enemy number one seems to be defining a certain section or faction in the ANC to characterize the EFF as enemy number one, which must never be entertained, which must never be interacted with on any issues that involve government. And it seems to be obtaining now because clearly the ANC is going to work with the Democratic Alliance moving forward. I
mean, we're hearing of a possible deal that is almost close to be signed between the ANC, the DA, the IFP, and the NFP. I'll be bringing the president of the NFP on the show in a few moments, and we'll talk about KZN shortly. But have you completely closed the door to the ANC now? Is it safe to say there's no opportunity to even speak before Friday?
No, look, we haven't. Actually, and as far as we're concerned, the ANC is supposed to come back to us because we have outlined our framework as to what are the terms of engagement. There are principles which we've outlined as to these are the areas which you must appreciate, define the economic freedom fighters, the land question, the matter of nationalization of mines, of banks and other strategic sectors of the economy, massive protected industrialization to create millions of jobs, free education for the poor up until higher education level, insourcing of workers, protection of workers' rights, anti-racism, anti-imperialism. Those are the values that we've given to the ANC, but they don't want to talk about that. They just want to elite pact like they did in 1994. Something that led to the crisis that South Africa has now, where more than 10, if not 11 million people who are unemployed or looking for jobs, where black people are more or less in the same conditions that they were under apartheid because of an elite pact that was reached between the minority white government to say that take political power, we're going to contain and retain economic power. It looks like this 2024, from a concession point of view, from a puppet mastering point of view, is going to be the 1994, because more or less the same things are going to happen where the white capitalist establishment is controlling the ANC to tell them what to do. They become naturally dismissive because their handlers are saying, work with the DA or something else is going to happen. I don't know what that something else is, but they are much more having affinity with the Democratic Alliance and the right-wing forces than the progressive forces. But in any way, we're going to define a common foreign policy agenda. We're going to define a common domestic policy agenda, a common continental agenda as to how do we collectively develop.
But to be clear, for as long as the ANC says, even if they come and say, we are committed to the principles you mentioned, but we want to bring in other parties like the DA, that is a non-negotiable for you. You're not willing to, even if they appreciate what you want to cover in your principles and interests, you're not willing to entertain any chat that involves you being with the DA.
As far as we're concerned, that's far. The ANC has never got to discuss any detail of the composition of government and all of those. They speak first on elite pacting, that they want all political parties that must come, but they are avoiding the question of principles, that upon which principles and upon which ideological foundation are we going to constitute this government.
Okay.
And that is problematic because you can't just elite pact. You can't just say, take this position, take that position, and you don't want to talk about what defines that particular government.
Yeah.
And that is where the difference between the EFF and the ANC is on about now. Our view is that the Democratic Alliance, the Freedom Front Plus, diametrically represent different interests to the interest of majority of South Africa, which is about redress of the imbalances of the past, and we have to then deal with that much more differently.
Where does this leave you for Friday's first sitting in Parliament? Will you participate in the voting of the new president?
Look, we are going to be participating in the Friday processes. We had a meeting today with the Umkhonto is a party to try to persuade MK to form part of that particular process. And we will be engaging tomorrow, even on Thursday, with other political parties that even when the puppets of the establishment try to concoct a neoliberal agenda that seeks to continue with the inequalities and the poverty of black people, we should fight back. We should field candidates for speaker, for deputy speaker, for president. And we want to appeal as well to the conscious members of the ANC that if they are given illegal and unlawful instructions, they must vote against such nonsense so that we can constitute a proper government that is going to lead South Africa.
So you will be fielding your own candidates for speaker, for president?
If there is no agreement that is sound between now and Friday, we're definitely going to field candidates for all the positions that are going to be contested.
Let me ask about the EFF's position of a national government of unity and get clarity on what has changed. Because Julius Malema, when he spoke to the BBC last year, was, and I quote here, the president is not carrying the national agenda. We need a government of national unity constituted by all of us who are not driven by political party interests, but the interests of South Africa to resolve this immediate crisis which will affect all aspects of our lives, end quote. He was referring to the challenges the country is facing around the economy, around unemployment, ESCOM. What did he mean by that when he supported then the idea of a government of national unity with all the parties, as he said, but now as the EFF, you're coming and saying that's actually not a position you want to take?
So that context of that interview, which is being opportunistically utilized now, was when we're saying that Ramaphosa must immediately step down. And remember, the Constitution says that when a president steps down, the government is dissolved. And then we say that as part of the transitional measures. It was after the Pala situation where we say that Ramaphosa must step down as part of the transitional measures now, so that we don't go to early elections. Let's constitute a government of national unity, whatever it's formed for, because the period towards elections was not necessary to could call early elections. That was the context of it. But also you must appreciate that we're now dealing with the politics of electoral outcomes that came from the 2024 general elections. And by the way, in that period when he spoke about that, it was before the parties whom we had said that ideally in South Africa, when the ANC loses power, it must be taken out of power completely.
Yeah.
But we had a variety and a myriad of political parties who were sponsored by the Oppenheimers to characterize and define the economic freedom fighters as an enemy force.
Yeah.
And we can't stand back and say, you call us an enemy force and then later on want to form government with you. We will never do that.
To be fair,
Yes.
Floyd, I watched this interview again. This context, the presenter was asking Julius Malema about the crisis, the challenges that the country is facing, and particularly because we're just about to get into, I think, the highest stages of load shedding. So he was asking it around that and not necessarily around President Cyril Ramaphosa and whether or not he must step down. And the response to the challenges like ESCOM, unemployment, the economy, Julius Malema says then we need a government of national unity.
I can tell you now emphatically that the context was due to the failure of Ramaphosa, that Ramaphosa must step down, and in the intervening period, there must be a government. There will never be a period where the Commander-in-Chief of the EFF said that we must constitute a government of national unity. Because I remember, our approach to the 2024 general elections was for an outright victory. And there was no way that you could have said that we must constitute a government of national unity post-2024 then. He was speaking in the intervening period that if we recall this one and the government collapses, let's constitute a GNU for transitional purposes, not as a permanent feature.
Let's talk about KwaZulu-Natal. There are reports this evening that there is possibly a deal that is almost to be signed between the ANC, the DA, the IFP, and the NFP. And I know you had indicated as the EFF that you would want the MK to lead in KwaZulu-Natal because they would be the party that received the highest of votes. How do you respond to the possibility of this deal that would see the IFP president become premier of KwaZulu-Natal?
We have not yet authenticated that rumor which was spread by Mail and Guardian, by the way. The NFP president is going to talk to you today to either confirm or refute that, but we are not aware of such an agreement. But we think that whatever government is constituted in the province of KwaZulu-Natal should involve Mkhonto weSizwe, because a decisive number of the people of KwaZulu-Natal have voted for Mkhonto weSizwe party. So, the Mkhonto weSizwe party is at 45-46% of the vote in KwaZulu-Natal. And then the second party is 18% and the other one is 17%. It will be just pure opportunism. It will be unethical to want to constitute a government when a decisive number of the people of KwaZulu-Natal have said that Mkhonto weSizwe is the preferred party.
But why didn't you take that position in Joburg and Ekurhuleni? Because there was a time when the ANC was trying to say to you, the majority of people have voted for us. We've got the highest number of votes. Let's become premier. And yet, what you insisted on as the EFF was, no, let's give the opportunity to the smaller parties, which is why in Johannesburg now, there's a leader from a smaller party that has become mayor.
You know, in the context of Ekurhuleni and Johannesburg, the ANC just is the one that refused to form government in those instances, because we said to them, here are basic principles of issues which, by the way, even constitute your own conference resolutions on the land question, on the creation of a state bank, on the discontinuation of private ownership of the South African Reserve Bank, on the provision of free sanitary towels to girls who cannot afford that, on insourcing of workers. And I will say, but these constitute your resolutions. Let's please have to constitute government based on those principles. And then they arrogantly said that we cannot do that. And then what we did purposefully and tactically was to then unplug them from power, because we knew that once we unplug the ANC from power, they become irrelevant as an organization. And we succeeded in reducing the electoral dominance in those spaces where we unplugged them from power. That was a tactical move which was superior and is not applicable to the current conditions, because this is a different sphere of government, and issues that are dealt with are completely different than what we're dealing with in 2016 and 2021.
All right, Floyd, I just want to go through some of the tweets that have come through during our conversation before we wrap up. We've got Xolile, who says that cooperation facilitates progress. The leading party must put the interest of the people at the center of any talks. People want delivery, no more talks. That's Xolile in Kukuletu. Hashirama says they have no choice, really. They have to compromise, but it looks like there won't be any resolution soon. Every party is still trying to get things going on their own way. And KG says, I expect the political parties, to maintain their policies and ideologies. It wouldn't make sense if an ANC, EFF or MK were to work with a far-right party like the DA. What would they be working on? I love that Floyd clarified that the EFF wouldn't work with the DA. The policies, ambitions and objectives just clash. That's a message there from KG. Thank you so much for sharing with us some of your responses to the question we're asking tonight on Twitter. We'll also play some of your WhatsApp voice notes that have come through. Floyd Shivambu, thank you so much for joining us tonight on Face the Nation.
No, thank you very much for having us. And I think, we're clear in terms of how we're moving forward. We've given the ANC an opportunity to respond to issues that reflect the interest of our people. They are not interested in that. They want to elite pact with the Democratic Alliance because they seem to be controlled by the same establishment. We are not going to be part of that. But if they want to talk about the interest of the people, the EFF is available to talk as to how do we constitute a progressive government and will take South Africa forward. All
right, so the door is not completely closed to the ANC. After the break, we'll speak to the NFP president to find out what's going on in KwaZulu-Natal. Is there a deal possibly on the cards? Stay with us here on Face the Nation. Welcome back. Now, the Democratic Alliance is not saying much about talks around coalitions and the formation of a government of national unity. The party says its Federal Council has unanimously endorsed the mandate of Federal leader John Steenhuisen and its negotiating team to continue with the process to form governments at national and provincial levels with hung legislatures. Joining us now to unpack this is the DA spokesperson, Solly Malatsi. Solly, thank you so much for making time for us this evening on Face the Nation. Let me just start with what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal. The NFP they've released a statement saying that they are open to being part of this government of unity. What are you able to share with us in terms of the discussions you've had as the Democratic Alliance, not only with the ANC, but the IFP and NFP as well in KwaZulu-Natal?
Thanks very much, Clement, for the opportunity and greetings to your viewers. So from our side, what we have been doing since last week, Thursday, when the announcement of a proposal around the government of national unity was made by President Ramaphosa, was to immediately initiate, the formalization of our negotiations team and to give them a mandate to go into negotiations with different parties first, to get a sense of what their understanding of what has been proposed is and what their reaction is, and secondly, to get further clarity from the ANC as the proposer of the model in terms of how it would actually work. So the discussions have been taking place with the negotiation teams from those two parties primarily, and that also meant that there was an internal process that needed to take place. That process culminated with the DA's Federal Council sitting yesterday initially and then continuing today. And the broad outcome of that Federal Council discussion was that because of also time limits, with Friday now being the deadline where everything else needs to be sorted, the Federal Council resolution was that we give the negotiating team the mandate to continue with the discussion, because up to this stage, nothing has been finalized in terms of what can be presented as the final outcome of the negotiations. And secondly, that whatever the discussions that are taking place around the possible formation of a government of national unity can also be limited to the scenarios in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, because those two were also not won through a majority. So in terms of the latter question regarding what is the pronouncement now being made by the NFP, is that we are obviously aware of the fact that whatever the outcome of the discussions that are currently ongoing at national level, they will also have an impact on the final composition of the type of government that you will end up having in KwaZulu-Natal.
So in a statement you released today, you said the DA, through the Federal Council, has, and I quote here, unanimously endorsed a resolution affirming the mandate of the federal leader, John Steenhuisen, and the party's negotiating team to continue with the process towards the formation of government at national and provincial levels with hung legislatures, end quote, which is what you've just outlined. Just in practical terms, what does it actually mean? Does this mean there's a go-ahead now to finalize this agreement with the ANC? Does this mean that the DA is agreeing to actually be part of the executive with the ANC, not only at provincial, but at national level as well?
So what it does say is that because procedurally, in terms of how we function as the DA and the structures that have authority to make decisions of that magnitude, Federal Council is the highest decision-making body of the organization. And because it had not been convened since the announcement was made by the President, the Federal Executive was at the time the body empowered to make that decision. So we needed to formalize that mandate through Federal Council. And what was also useful to Federal Council was because we had to get a status report in terms of what are the preliminary negotiations saying and the discussion. There was support that continue to negotiate, and then for the final decision, because nothing has been concluded, we are ceding power to the Federal Executive that whenever the final decision, the final outcome of the negotiations are made, you don't need to convene another Federal Council per se to make the final decision. That final decision can be made by the Federal Executive because of the limited time also. Because at the end of the day, by Friday before 10 o'clock, when Parliament sits for its first sitting, this needs to have been resolved.
You indicated in that statement that you are doing this as the DA in order to safeguard the Constitution, ensure stability, and generate economic growth. Does that mean as the DA, you are then willing to compromise on some of your positions to ensure this stability? I mean, it's not a secret that you don't see eye to eye on a lot of things with the ANC.
Yeah, the bottom line, Clement, that I think everyone recognizes with any part of negotiation is that it will eventually lead to a scenario where there is some compromise, where there is also some amendments of, existing positions. But before we even venture into that, all of those depend on the key thing, which is based on the negotiations and our understanding of what's being proposed. Do we agree?
So go ahead, Solly, we're listening.
Sorry, I got disrupted there. That one, if we agree on going into what this mooted government of national unity is, then there will also have to be a discussion on what is the key elements of what a program of governing together would be, and that would lead to the inference that you are making in terms of potential areas of compromise and potential areas of alignment.
Okay, your statement just lastly mentions John Steenhuisen, that him and the party's negotiating team will continue with the process of forming government and going forward. Just please help us understand his involvement going forward, because initially there was a specific team that was appointed. Help us understand why he's now been brought in to then continue with this process as well. No,
the simple thing in there is that the leader of the party is the apex authority of the party. The mandate of leading the party rests on the shoulders of the leader. We have appointed a committee of the negotiating team to execute the mandate of the party, and by extension of John Steenhuisen, who's the leader of the party. So it's not necessarily that he's suddenly being brought in. He was never part of the negotiating team, but it was to highlight that the apex authority in terms of getting the mandate of the party lies with the leader of the party.
All right, makes sense. Solly Malatsi, the DA spokesperson, thank you so much for making time for us on Face the Nation tonight. Let's go to KwaZulu-Natal there, because the question tonight is there a possible deal on the cards? The NFP seems to have chosen to work with the ANC and the IFP and possibly the DA in an agreement that may see IFP president elected as premier of that province. The National Freedom Party president, Evan Barnes, joins us now via video link. Evan, thank you so much for making time for us. Good evening to you. you have been courted by the ANC. We're hearing of a possible deal that's almost to a conclusion between your party, the ANC, the DA and the IFP. What are you able to share with us tonight?
Good evening to good evening to yourself, my brother. We'd like to first explain our position as a National Freedom Party, that when the results were pronounced on Sunday, on Tuesday, we sat as the national executive of the National Freedom Party and we took a resolution that we would engage with any political party that approaches the National Freedom Party to go govern in KZN, and placing it on record that we have been approached by the ANC and the IFP. There is no deal that is in place. There are no agreements that are in place. We have not been approached by the Democratic Alliance. We have not been approached by the MK and well as the EFF. So these are the only two organizations that have approached us. Because if you look at the politics and the coalition in KZN, it will have to be 4 political parties, if not 3. So the IFP, ANC, and NFP, if and when they do reach an agreement, they would not govern KZN without the Democratic Alliance or without the MK party. So currently, for us as the organization, we have taken that decision that we'll welcome any negotiations from all political parties. And currently, there is no agreement that is still in place. We are still going to meet with various that have called upon us to meet with them. So
far you've met with the ANC, you've met with the IFP. I have a follow-up question on that. Before I get to that question though, the MK party, there was confusion about whether or not the party, the NFP, has had conversations with the MK party, if they've approached you or you've approached them. Can you just clarify that for us? Have you had discussions with the MK party? Do you have appetite as the NFP to have a conversation with them?
We have an appetite of speaking to all political parties that would help the people of KZN to alleviate them from poverty and change their lives. So we are not going to put any red tape on anyone and say we won't negotiate with those people based on our historical background. That's not going to be the case over here. We will negotiate with any political party that seeks to need the NFP to be part of government in KwaZulu-Natal. And currently we have met only formally with the ANC. The IFP has called and will be meeting with the IFP tomorrow, just that we're waiting for the time and venue where we will meet with the IFP. We're also looking forward to any other political party that would engage with us as the National Freedom Party.
So you have not met with the MK party yet, but you're open to having conversations with them. Okay. So
we're open to meet with anyone. But we haven't met with the MK party as yet.
Okay. So let's talk about the people that you have had formal conversations with. Let's start with the ANC. You said the IFP, you will be meeting with them as well tomorrow. With the seat you have in the provincial legislature as the NFP, you are being regarded by some as almost the kingmakers here. What is the ANC proposing to you? What is the IFP proposing to you? And what would you like to give in return for your support as the NFP?
We took a position as a political party that we want to become a service delivery initiative in KwaZulu-Natal. We wouldn't want to be a political party that would be a backbencher, supporting other parties in fulfilling their political mandate in terms of changing people's lives. But we also want to play a vital role. We've got a track record. When we are given an opportunity to lead people, we always lead them with dignity and honesty and integrity. So we have taken that position. So when we meet with the different parties tomorrow to finalize our negotiations with them, in particular the ANC, because we'll be meeting probably for the second, if not the third time tomorrow, then we will put our position. Remember, KwaZulu-Natal, we need more than 3 political parties to govern KwaZulu-Natal. So we'll have to then sit around with all the parties that we come to an agreement with. Then we'll be able to have a final arrangement in terms of how we're going to co-govern KwaZulu-Natal. Until then, we have a position as NFP that we want to be part of the service delivery initiative in KwaZulu-Natal.
Does that mean you want to be part of the government of KwaZulu-Natal? So one of the MEC positions, are we talking about the legislature, perhaps one of the committee chairs, the speaker? What do you mean when you say you want to be part of the delivery of services? Does it mean you want to be part of the government, be involved and included in the cabinet of the provincial government?
It has to be that way. There's no other way.
Okay, I hear that. So that is what you expect. Can I also ask, just lastly before I let you go, about the proposition that is out there? The African National Congress seems to be taking a position that the party that has received the highest votes in the province of KwaZulu-Natal must be the one that's able to lead. My understanding is that the ANC doesn't plan on putting up a candidate for the position of premier. As the NFP, what's your position on that? Because it's the MK that received the highest votes, then it's the IFP, then it's the African National Congress. Do you take a similar position with what seems to be the position the ANC is taking, in that if indeed there is even a coalition with you and the other parties, it would have to be the IFP that takes the premiership because they got the highest number of votes in that coalition setup in the province?
Our position as the National Freedom Party, we would look at our policy in terms of co-governance. We will look at our manifesto. Then we will have to sit down and negotiate with those political parties that seek to bring us on board in terms of governance. Then once that is done, we'll be able then to take a decision. Say that again, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, sir.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, then we'll be able to take a decision. If in that round meeting, all parties agree to give the premiership to either the ANC, IFP, or whomsoever they feel it's important for them to become premiers, we would support it. Remember, the NFP is not worried about positions, but we are worried about our people, that we should change their lives.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for making time for us. The National Party President, Arvin Barnes, is speaking to us about the conversation that the party has had with the ANC and informally with the IFP. The question I've been asking you tonight is, what do you want the political parties you voted for to do in these coalition talks? Must they stand in their ideological position or compromise for the sake of collaboration? Let's take a listen to some of the WhatsApp voice notes that have come through.
Good evening. I'm Jabulo Mkonyini from Guamashu. I personally think that each and every party should stand firm at their policies and not compromise, because they will be failing their supporters and their voters. So each and every party should stand firm to their ideology and try to implement it at their highest level. I thank you.
Good evening, Clement, and the viewers. It's Arik Hadel from here in Aiken of south of Johannesburg. The political parties should give the voters what they asked for. The voters have spoken. Since they didn't give one party majority of their votes, it means this coalition or this government of national unity, it means this is what they wanted. So let them work together, find a way to work together and give back to the voters. Thanks, bye.
Hi Clement, this is Nalongocho. I actually expect the EFF, which is the party that I voted for, to stand firm by its principles and ideology, stand firm by its cardinal pillars, and ensure that it does not work with the DA. It does not involve itself with the government of national unity, which involves the Democratic Alliance.
All right, thank you so much for your WhatsApp voice notes. Now, the newly formed Umkhonto weSizwe Party has filed urgent papers in the Constitutional Court to interdict the National Assembly's first sitting, which will be held this coming Friday in Cape Town. This comes after the party's letter of demand to the Secretary to Parliament and Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, asking the two officers to refrain from convening the first sitting that did not yield the desired results. Now the party seeks a hearing in the Apex Court before Friday. Let's bring in Advocate Mudibedi Pindela, who is the Secretary to the National Council of Provinces. Advocate, thank you so much for making time for us. Will the National Assembly still sit on Friday despite this urgent court bid?
Yes, indeed, the National Assembly will sit because in terms of the Constitution, the Chief Justice has called the sitting of the National Assembly. He has determined the date and time at which the National Assembly will sit.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to once again, and this has been done several times, to clarify what the Constitution says? Because in its court papers, the party said that the National Assembly would not be properly constituted with less than 350 members present. According to the rules and what the Constitution says about quorum, can you just clarify what it says, what's allowed and what's not allowed?
Well, I have not seen the papers because we have not been served with the papers. But what I can say is that the Constitution provides that the National Assembly consists of the number of members referred to in the Constitution, elected during the elections. And according to us, the members of the National Assembly have been elected. The National Assembly has got 400 members, which the Electoral Commission has designated.
So, sorry, Advocate, when you say you have not been served yet with the papers, what does this mean then for this legal battle in the Apex Court? Because the MK party expects that it must be heard before Friday, but as a defending party, you would have to be served with the papers, so you prepare yourself and know how to defend yourself on Friday. What does that communicate?
Oh, sorry.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if we have been served with the papers. If we have been served with the papers, obviously we will look at the papers and see as to whether we have to defend the matter as Parliament, or we have to take a decision to abide by the judgment of the court. Okay,
so I spoke to the Deputy President of the EFF, who says, as the EFF, they've tried to engage the MK party to come to this first sitting of Parliament on Friday. I know Parliament previously said they cancelled the flights and accommodation. If the MK party changes its mind between today and Friday and decides they want to attend, what does it mean logistically for you?
Well, it would be obviously it would be a logistical nightmare for us. But if they intend to attend, then we will have to see how to make arrangements for them to attend. But perhaps the other point that I should make is that it's not only the National Assembly that will be sitting on that day. The provincial legislatures will also be sitting on that day, on the 14th. And the provisions of the Constitution relating to the sittings of the provincial legislatures are similar to the provisions relating to the sittings of the composition of the National Assembly, as well as the National Council of Provinces that will be sitting on the 15th of June. The provisions relating to the composition of the National Council of Provinces are similar to those relating to the sitting, the composition of the National Assembly, as well as the provincial legislatures.
All right. Advocate Mudibedi Pindela, the Secretary to the National Council of Provinces, thank you for joining us on Face the Nation tonight. And thanks to you for watching us on this Tuesday evening. We'll be back on Thursday at 8 p.m. Have a good evening. Cheers.